Philippines, October 1944. Rain falls like glass needles on the jungle canopy. The air smells of smoke, diesel, and wet earth. Across a clearing near Leyte Gulf, American soldiers move with practiced rhythm. Mud clings to their boots, but their hands stay steady. They unload metal containers from a truck marked with a small white star. Within minutes, stoves are lit. Flames hiss under the steel lids. Steam rises, not from shell bursts, but from soup. A line of soldiers forms, helmets dripping, rifles slung across shoulders. Each man receives a plate of hot stew and coffee still steaming despite the rain. Just beyond the tree line, a Japanese scout watches. His unit hasn't eaten properly in 3 days. Their rice sacks are empty. Their canteens are muddy. Yet here, under artillery thunder, the Americans eat like a machine that never stops. He whispers to his commander, unable to understand how food could exist in such chaos, because to them, it looked like something impossible. War run by order, not desperation. By 1944, the Pacific War had become a struggle of endurance. Heat, rot, and hunger fought alongside bullets. Every island was a battlefield and a graveyard. The Japanese army had entered the war with the belief that spirit outweighed logistics, that discipline and sacrifice would outlast any industrial advantage. But in the tropics, faith alone could not feed men. The U.S. military saw war differently. From the moment America entered in 1941, it treated supply as a weapon. Every rifleman, pilot, and medic depended on an invisible army of planners, drivers, and cooks. Behind every assault wave stood convoys of trucks, ships, and trains delivering food, fuel, and medicine. Commanders knew that an army that ate well fought longer, thought clearer, and recovered faster. In the jungles of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, both sides faced the same environment: thick humidity, endless rain, insects that spread disease. But their experiences could not have been more different. Japanese soldiers often survived on half rations. Many lived on rice mixed with dried fish or pickled plums. When supply lines broke, they foraged or went hungry. Dysentery, malaria, and malnutrition hit them as hard as enemy fire. American troops faced those same jungles, but carried something the Japanese could not match: a system. Every U.S. division had its own field kitchens and sanitation units. Mobile stoves rolled on trucks. Insulated food containers kept meals hot for hours. Even on the front line, mess sergeants followed strict routines: disinfect cooking tools, boil water, keep waste buried far from camp. It wasn't comfort. It was survival through structure. The Japanese saw this order as strange, even wasteful. Many had been taught that suffering was proof of dedication. But American commanders saw the opposite. General George C. Marshall and the Quartermaster Corps believed that feeding a soldier was not a luxury. It was strategy. A fed soldier could move faster, think clearer, and obey longer. By 1943, this mindset was reshaping the Pacific Campaign. When U.S. Marines landed on Guadalcanal, early supply chaos caused hunger and confusion. Lessons came fast. Within months, portable field kitchens appeared across new landing zones. Men who once ate cold cans of beans under fire began receiving hot coffee, stew, and fresh bread. It wasn't glamorous, but it changed morale. Reports from the field noted that warm meals restored discipline faster than any speech. Soldiers who ate together stayed organized. Even the smell of hot food reminded them that someone, somewhere, was planning for them. It created trust in the system, a quiet, powerful morale weapon. Meanwhile, Japanese diaries told another story. One infantryman on Bougainville wrote, "We march for days with no rice. Our strength fades. The Americans drop food from planes while we chew grass." It wasn't a lack of courage. It was a failure of structure. Japan had built an army designed to win quick wars, not sustain distant campaigns. The Americans turned food into a science. Nutritionists calculated exact calorie counts for every soldier, 4,000 per day in tropical combat zones. Quartermasters tested new rations like the C ration and K ration, each designed for portability and balance. Food wasn't just calories, it was chemistry. Salt to prevent dehydration, protein for muscle repair, caffeine to stay alert, and behind every soldier's mess, tin was a doctrine. The U.S. Army Field Manual on Sanitation and Food Service outlined every rule. Never reuse dishwater, always boil for 10 minutes, inspect every utensil for dirt. Failure meant punishment. Cleanliness was not optional. While Japanese supply ships were hunted down by U.S. submarines, American logistics only grew stronger. Convoys ran with clockwork timing. Cargo planes dropped supplies across entire island chains. Ships like the Liberty and Victory class delivered mountains of canned goods, flour, coffee, and frozen meat. Every shipment meant another week of survival. For the Japanese watching from the jungle, it seemed unreal. Their own mess units had collapsed under bombardment. Yet the Americans somehow made order bloom in mud. By the time U.S. forces landed on Leyte in late 1944, the difference was clear. American soldiers stepped off landing craft, already knowing when their next meal would come. Japanese defenders fought while their bellies emptied. Clean hands, hot food, steady rhythm. It looked simple, but it was a signal. America had learned to fight with machines, math, and meals. And this transformation, born from years of trial, was just beginning to reveal its full power. The roots of America's wartime food system went back to World War I. In 1918, U.S. troops in France learned a hard lesson. Logistics could win or lose battles. After that war, the Quartermaster Corps studied every mistake: spoiled rations, disease outbreaks, broken supply lines, and built a plan for the future. When World War II erupted, that plan came alive. By 1942, the United States had transformed its entire economy into an engine of supply. Factories that once made cars now built field stoves. Canneries produced meat and vegetables packed for the tropics. The Quartermaster Research and Development Center in Chicago tested everything from powdered eggs to heat-proof chocolate. The goal was clear: feed millions of men anywhere, anytime. Every U.S. division carried its own miniature version of that system. The rolling kitchen was its heart. It could unfold in minutes, cook hundreds of meals, and move before the enemy struck. The insulated mermite containers, steel-lined, gasket-sealed, kept soup or coffee hot for hours. Food arrived steaming even in the middle of the jungle. Soldiers joked that the mess sergeant's coffee was stronger than enemy fire. This wasn't luck. It was planning so detailed that even the number of spoons per company was tracked. A mess officer's daily log recorded how much food was issued, how many men were served, and whether waste was buried. The Quartermaster Corps believed that hygiene was as important as ammunition. Dirty kitchens bred disease, and disease killed more soldiers than bullets in tropical wars. Japan never developed this depth of organization. Its army operated on assumptions of self-sufficiency. Each unit carried what it could and relied on resupply from the sea. When U.S. submarines began sinking transport ships in 1943, Japanese troops on distant islands were cut off. Many starved within months. By contrast, the Americans could lose a convoy and still recover. Redundant systems, overlapping routes, and airdrops made failure temporary. Technology amplified the gap. The U.S. introduced portable water purification units and field sterilizers that could disinfect hundreds of utensils at once. Japanese soldiers boiled canteens in muddy streams. The difference wasn't only comfort, it shaped combat readiness. U.S. troops could eat, sleep, and fight in cycles. Japanese troops burned energy faster than they replaced it. At headquarters, supply officers were treated with respect. Generals like Douglas MacArthur and Chester Nimitz understood that their advances depended on logistics. MacArthur famously said, "An army marches on its stomach." He meant it literally. His Pacific campaigns were timed around supply availability. Airfields were built not just for fighters, but for cargo planes. Engineers carved roads through jungle so field kitchens could follow the front. Every hot meal delivered was a message. The system works. It told the soldier that the machine behind him cared enough to plan his next bite. That sense of reliability built morale stronger than propaganda ever could. Japanese officers began noticing. Reports recovered after battles mentioned the American obsession with cleanliness. One diary described the shock of finding captured U.S. camps spotless, with trash buried, utensils washed, and food still warm in insulated cans. The writer noted, "They fight as if war is a factory." He wasn't wrong. The U.S. military treated war like production. Efficiency meant power. Each unit followed procedure, from washing hands to lining up mess kits in order. It was a small act, repeated 1,000,000 times, forming an invisible rhythm that kept the army alive. This order also prevented chaos in crisis. When storms hit Leyte, when supply dumps caught fire, when trucks sank in mud, mess units improvised without collapsing. Manuals trained cooks to use local fuel, build makeshift stoves from oil drums, and maintain sanitation with minimal water. Improvisation was allowed only within the rules, a controlled kind of chaos that still served hot food. By 1944, American logistics had become a culture. It wasn't about comfort. It was identity. Soldiers took pride in clean kitchens, sharp knives, and hot meals. It meant discipline. It meant civilization in a place where everything else was falling apart. To the Japanese, this order felt alien. To the Americans, it was normal. It reflected a national mindset. Organization as strength. As the war moved toward the Philippines, these systems reached perfection. Cargo ships carried thousands of tons of food labeled and stored with mathematical precision. Every crate had a destination, every soldier a meal count. It was bureaucracy turned into survival. And when U.S. forces landed on Leyte that October, they brought not only tanks and artillery, but the power to feed an army anywhere. It was here that the contrast would reach its peak, where Japanese disbelief turned into shock. 1. Human angle. Morale in a tin cup war was not only fought with guns, it was fought with nerves. In the Pacific, where heat and fear mixed daily, morale could break faster than a rifle bolt. The U.S. Army knew that no soldier could endure long on cold rations and exhaustion. That's why the field kitchen became more than a place to eat. It was a moment of normal life in a world that had lost all sense of it. A hot cup of coffee could mean more than a medal. After days in the jungle, the smell of real food cut through the rot of war. Soldiers gathered in lines not just for calories, but for connection. They joked, traded stories, and forgot for a few minutes that death was a few yards away. Reports from frontline. Psychologists later confirmed it. Troops who received regular hot meals showed lower signs of combat fatigue and higher levels of cooperation. Feeding schedules created rhythm. Rhythm created focus, and focus kept men alive. The Japanese, running on starvation rations, never experienced that cycle of recovery. The difference was invisible on maps, but it showed in the way armies moved and fought. To the average U.S. infantryman, the mess line was home. To the Japanese watching from the jungle, it looked like an impossible luxury. But it was discipline disguised as comfort. Technological angle, the machines that fed. Millions' every field kitchen was a miniature factory. The M1937 field range was its heart, a steel stove that burned anything from gasoline to coconut shells. It could bake, fry, and boil for 200 men. Its design was simple but genius, foldable, transportable, nearly indestructible. Next came the Mermite container, a triple insulated metal cylinder that kept food hot for 8 hours or more. Even after being dropped in mud or rain, it opened to reveal steaming stew or coffee. These inventions didn't come from luck. They came from years of military engineering and field testing. U.S. mess units also carried sterilizers that boiled every utensil after use, large pots that disinfected with chlorinated water, and fly-proof garbage pits lined with lime. Every detail mattered. Clean spoons prevented dysentery. Boiled water prevented malaria outbreaks. The Japanese had no equivalent systems. Their troops often shared utensils and cooked in contaminated water sources. Disease spread fast, wiping out entire companies before the enemy even appeared. The U.S. logistics chain backed these tools with constant resupply. Refrigerated ships carried frozen meat and vegetables. Canned goods like Spam, corned beef hash, and fruit cocktail became staples. Nothing went to waste. Even coffee grounds were reused as mosquito repellents. Technology made it possible, but it was human precision that made it unstoppable. Tactical angle. Feeding the war machine, a soldier fights better when he knows when he'll eat. That simple truth shaped American tactics. Commanders built feeding schedules into operational plans. During amphibious assaults, mess teams landed right behind the first wave. By nightfall, they were already cooking. On the beaches of Saipan and Iwo Jima, the smell of coffee often mixed with gunpowder. The Quartermaster Corps worked in sync with combat units. Supply trucks and kitchen trailers moved in columns under cover of darkness. Every division had designated feeding hours. Officers enforced them with the same seriousness as weapons inspections. Even during air raids, soldiers often resumed meals minutes after the attack ended. This rhythm created predictability, and predictability created endurance. Troops learned to trust that food would come, no matter the situation. That trust kept panic low and focus high. The Japanese army had no such rhythm. Their soldiers often fought on empty stomachs, losing strength day by day. Diaries from captured men tell of fainting during marches or fighting while dizzy from hunger. They envied the Americans' ability to fight with full strength every day, calling them men with iron bellies. The difference was not courage, it was system. The Americans fought as an organism where every part, from the rifleman to the cook, worked in harmony. When the shooting stopped, the smell of soup often filled the air before the smoke cleared. It was proof that the machine of war still functioned. And as both sides learned, that quiet reliability could be more powerful than any gun. The discipline of feeding men became an invisible weapon, one built on planning, machines, and morale, all of which set the stage for something deeper. The values behind this order, and how Japan reacted when they saw it up close. 4. Cultural angle. Cleanliness as identity to American soldiers, order and hygiene were not preferences. They were identity. The idea of sanitation as discipline came from the homeland itself. Before the war, public schools, factories, and army camps trained citizens to value cleanliness and routine. When those same men went overseas, they carried those habits into the jungle. The mess tent became a reflection of American culture. Stainless ladles, neat rows of trays, even trash sorted before burial. Manuals stated that a clean kitchen is a fighting kitchen. Soldiers laughed at the phrase, but they followed it. Keeping a spotless mess area became a point of pride. Japanese observers were stunned. Their army valued endurance and simplicity, but not hygiene in the same way. Many units cooked near latrines or left waste exposed. Diseases spread fast, and yet officers accepted it as unavoidable. To the Americans, it was unacceptable. Even in combat, inspectors checked kitchens for violations. Some sergeants were punished for unclean gear. This wasn't just about health. It was about mindset. Cleanliness symbolized control over chaos. The Americans fought in mud but refused to become part of it. Their discipline in the kitchen mirrored their precision in combat. When the Japanese saw this, they didn't see comfort. They saw an enemy that treated war like administration, a nation that made organization itself a weapon. Enemy angle, shock and disbelief captured Japanese diaries and intelligence reports told the same story. Disbelief. One officer wrote after observing a U.S. position on Bougainville, "They cook as if they are home. Their soup smells of meat. Their plates shine. We live like animals, yet they dine like men." American soldiers didn't notice they were being watched. They were too busy following routine, washing hands, lining up, eating, laughing. To the Japanese, this calm order looked like arrogance. To the Americans, it was just normal life. When Japanese prisoners were taken, many were astonished by the food they received. Rice, meat, vegetables, clean water. Some cried. They hadn't eaten that well in months. Reports from U.S. interrogators described how stunned POWs were by the abundance and cleanliness. One even asked if the Americans fed their own soldiers the same way. He couldn't believe they did. This psychological contrast mattered. The mighty Japanese fought with desperation, often starving, yet refusing surrender. But hunger broke morale faster than fear. U.S. troops, constantly supplied and cared for, could fight day after day without collapse. Behind every American rifle was a supply line that never slept. Behind every Japanese rifle was a stomach running empty. The Japanese didn't lose belief in courage. They lost belief in endurance. They realized that no amount of spirit could overcome organized abundance. Medical angle, food as prevention. The American obsession with cleanliness had another result: lower casualties from disease. In the Pacific, tropical illnesses like dysentery, malaria, and dengue were just as deadly as combat. The U.S. Army Medical Department worked closely with the Quartermaster Corps to create field sanitation teams. Every battalion had trained medics who inspected mess gear, tested water, and enforced waste disposal rules. They tracked everything: hand-washing frequency, temperature of cooked food, distance between kitchens and latrines. These measures sound small, but they changed everything. Between 1942 and 1944, disease rates among American troops in the Pacific dropped by almost half. For the Japanese, the opposite happened. Without consistent sanitation, infections spread uncontrollably. Malaria killed more Japanese soldiers than American bullets. Food was cooked in swamp water, utensils were shared, and medical supplies ran out. The U.S. system was scientific, data-driven, and relentless. It turned cooking into a form of healthcare. Meals were balanced with vitamins, salts, and calories tailored to the climate. Soldiers received instruction on why they couldn't skip meals or eat spoiled rations. Science guided everything, from the use of powdered milk to the required boiling time for water purification. The Japanese army still relied on tradition and improvisation. American soldiers relied on method. That difference became survival. By 1944, the pattern was clear. The U.S. didn't just fight with technology and firepower, it fought with cleanliness, nutrition, and logistics. The Japanese could not comprehend it at first. Then they began to witness its effect. Battles won not just by strength, but by structure. The stage was set for the moment that revealed it all, when the two systems collided under fire in the mud of Leyte. Leyte, October 1944. The Pacific War had entered its decisive phase. Japan's empire was shrinking. The Philippines stood as the final barrier between U.S. forces and the Japanese homeland. When American troops landed on Leyte, they faced brutal resistance. Endless rain, thick jungle, and constant artillery fire. But while the fighting raged, another kind of war unfolded behind the front line, one that would decide who could endure longest. Within days of landing, American engineers carved roads out of mud. Trucks rolled in hauling supplies. Among them came the mobile field kitchens, their metal sides splattered with dirt, but their operations precise. Even as shells burst in the distance, mess teams unfolded tables, lit burners, and set up water drums for washing. The Japanese defenders watched through binoculars. To them, it was madness. The Americans were cooking under fire, yet the smell of hot stew drifted across the fields. Soldiers in foxholes smiled as steam rose from insulated cans. It wasn't luxury. It was order. Each U.S. infantry company followed a fixed routine. Breakfast at dawn, lunch when possible, dinner before nightfall. Meals came in insulated containers delivered by jeep or mule train. Cooks often risked their lives driving through artillery zones to keep that rhythm unbroken. In field reports, commanders noted that even brief disruptions in meal schedules caused a visible drop in morale. The Army understood that feeding men on time was as important as supplying bullets. One night, during a lull in the fighting near Dulag, Japanese scouts crept close to an American position. They expected chaos. What they found was organization glowing in the dark. Lanterns arranged neatly. Soldiers lined up quietly. Mess sergeants ladling stew without hurry. Even the garbage pits were covered. A captured scout later told interrogators that he thought the Americans were machines disguised as men. The Japanese situation could not have been more different. Their supply lines had collapsed. U.S. submarines had sunk the ships carrying rice and ammunition. Many Japanese units on Leyte were already surviving on less than 500 calories a day. Some boiled roots and leaves. Others slaughtered horses or ate unripe fruit, leading to sickness. One officer recorded, "We envy their food more than their guns." On the American side, even in chaos, systems functioned. Refrigerated barges off the coast supplied fresh meat and vegetables. The Quartermaster Corps worked non-stop unloading crates of canned food, flour, and coffee. Cooks prepared meals behind lines of sandbags, using makeshift roofs of canvas to keep out rain. Every detail was enforced. Water had to be boiled for 10 minutes before use. Latrines had to be dug 100 yards from any kitchen. Waste was buried by nightfall. Failure to follow these rules could mean punishment, even in battle. This discipline wasn't harshness. It was survival. The Japanese could not understand how an army that advanced so fast could remain so clean. In their eyes, war meant chaos. To Americans, war demanded order. That difference showed in every meal served. At one point, during the Leyte campaign, American medical officers noted a sharp drop in dysentery cases, fewer than 1% of total casualties. For the Japanese, disease claimed entire battalions. Hunger made them weak, delirious, and desperate. When rations ran out, they scavenged from dead American camps, often finding food still hot in insulated carriers. The discovery both amazed and humiliated them. There were moments of surreal contrast. While Japanese units melted into the jungle, eating whatever they could find, American troops nearby gathered for Thanksgiving. On November 23, 1944, field kitchens across Leyte served turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie in a war zone. Newspapers later reported that it was one of the most logistically complex meals ever served in combat. But it worked. Over 1 million pounds of turkey were shipped, cooked, and delivered to men under fire. For the soldiers eating that day, it wasn't just food. It was proof that they were part of something vast and unbreakable. Even miles from home, even in the mud and rain, the system had not failed them. Meanwhile, Japanese officers wrote in despair. A diary from a commander near Ormoc read, "They fight full and strong. We die hungry. The difference is not courage, but power. Power built from cleanliness, order, and relentless organization." By late November, Japanese resistance on Leyte began to crumble. Hunger had weakened their ability to fight. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion before reaching the front. American units kept pushing, sustained by supply chains that seemed infinite. Every bowl of soup, every clean spoon, every steaming cup of coffee was a signal. America's war machine was not just built on steel and fire, but on discipline that reached into every detail of life. The Japanese had underestimated that, and the cost of that mistake would soon become irreversible. By December 1944, Leyte had turned into a graveyard of broken divisions. Japan's once proud 16th Army was disintegrating. Its soldiers hid in the jungle, cut off from supplies, hunted by disease, and crushed by hunger. Their stomachs groaned louder than the distant gunfire. U.S. troops kept advancing, fueled by a rhythm that never stopped. Mess trucks splashed through knee-deep mud. Cooks boiled coffee under torn tents. Food arrived every day, not always on time, but always there. Even when rain turned roads into rivers, bulldozers and engineers cleared the way. The field kitchen never went silent. For the Americans, it became a symbol of endurance. Soldiers joked that as long as the mess line existed, they could not lose. Commanders understood the truth in that humor. A fed soldier stayed alert. A fed soldier obeyed. The system behind the front line was what kept the rifles firing. One night, during a lull near Palo, a group of Japanese prisoners was brought to a U.S. field kitchen. They hadn't eaten in days. The cooks, following standard procedure, served them the same meal as the troops: meat stew, bread, coffee. The prisoners hesitated. They thought it was a trick. Then they tasted it. Several wept quietly. They couldn't believe soldiers could eat like this while fighting on foreign soil. One of them muttered, "Impossible. You eat better in war than we do in peace." That moment captured the difference between the two armies. Japan's system depended on faith and sacrifice. America's depended on planning and precision. Faith could inspire. Planning could sustain. Captured documents later revealed that Japanese officers had studied American supply methods and called them industrial warfare. They realized too late that logistics had replaced glory as the key to victory. U.S. combat photographers captured scenes that amazed even home audiences. Soldiers eating hot stew beside artillery guns, cooks stirring giant pots while bombers roared overhead, trucks loaded with bread weaving through shell fire. It didn't look heroic, but it was the engine of victory. Japanese survivors described their own situation in grim terms. One lieutenant wrote, "We have nothing left to eat. I ordered my men to boil grass and tree bark. They obeyed, but one died that night." Hunger erased rank, erased discipline, erased hope. Meanwhile, U.S. troops continued rotating between fighting and eating with mechanical precision. Medical officers measured daily calorie intake. If a unit lost weight, additional rations were sent forward. Even in the middle of battle, paperwork flowed. Reports, requisitions, temperature logs, sanitation checklists. It was bureaucracy in its purest form, and it worked. By mid-December, Leyte's skies filled with American C-47 transports, dropping supplies directly to frontline units. Each crate was color-coded: red for rations, blue for medicine, green for ammunition. The efficiency was staggering. Every meal eaten on the front line was connected to a factory, a ship, a depot, and a plan written months before. The Japanese could only watch and wonder. Their entire logistical doctrine had been built for short wars fought close to home. In the jungles of the Philippines, that doctrine collapsed. Men who had been trained to fight to the death were now fighting to eat. An American war correspondent described a scene after one battle near Ormoc. Dozens of dead Japanese soldiers lay beside makeshift fires. Around them were rice bowls carved from bamboo, still filled with half-cooked roots. He wrote, "They died starving, facing an enemy whose kitchens never closed." The difference was stark. The Americans fought with systems. The Japanese fought with spirit. And in modern war, systems won. By Christmas, U.S. troops were still serving hot meals in the rain. Photographs showed men grinning as they held plates of turkey and fruit cocktail under ponchos. Those images were sent home to prove that America's reach had no limit. It could project comfort and order across oceans. For the Japanese trapped on Leyte, the holiday meant nothing. Their rations had vanished. Their morale had turned to dust. Commanders wrote that men could no longer carry rifles, that they fainted during marches, that their units disintegrated. Hunger had become a weapon, and the Americans wielded it without firing a shot. By January 1945, Leyte was lost. Japanese resistance collapsed under the combined weight of starvation, disease, and exhaustion. American units continued their advance toward Luzon with full bellies and steady morale. Historians would later call Leyte a logistical masterpiece. Every bullet, bandage, and bowl of soup had moved according to plan. It was the triumph of organization over improvisation, of systems over emotion. When the campaign ended, American officers walked through captured Japanese camps. They found rusted pots, rotten rice, and men who had died clutching empty bowls. One colonel quietly said, "They fought with courage, but courage can't boil water." And in that simple truth lay the turning point. The realization that America's real power was not in the gun, but in the order that fed it. When the Battle of Leyte ended in early 1945, the difference between the two armies was written not just in casualties, but in the way they lived and died. The Japanese 16th Army was erased, over 60,000 soldiers killed, many not by bullets, but by hunger and disease. American losses were heavy too, but their machine kept moving. They buried their dead, cleaned their utensils, and rolled the kitchens forward. Behind every U.S. division, mobile bakeries baked thousands of loaves daily. Field messes served more than 2 million hot meals across the Pacific by the war's end. Even deep in the jungle, soldiers could expect coffee, meat, vegetables, and sometimes fresh bread. The logistics chain that made it possible stretched from San Francisco to Manila. The Japanese never recovered from the shock of that difference. Prisoners consistently mentioned it in interrogations. One captured major admitted, "We thought you were weak because you cared about comfort. Now we know it made you strong." His words reflected a deep cultural contrast. The Japanese warrior ideal glorified endurance. The American system glorified efficiency. The U.S. Army's Quartermaster Corps documented every success. Reports detailed calorie counts, cook-to-soldier ratios, and kitchen mobility under fire. Engineers refined the M1937 field range, a portable stove that became the backbone of American feeding operations. Each unit could prepare a full meal for 100 men within 30 minutes. It burned gasoline, diesel, or wood. It was simple, rugged, and unstoppable. That stove became an invisible weapon. It allowed troops to stay longer in the field, to recover faster, and to fight in climates where others collapsed. Commanders learned that morale was a logistical product. A fed soldier fought harder, marched farther, and followed orders with clearer judgment. By contrast, Japanese divisions in the Philippines resorted to desperate measures. They slaughtered horses, ate palm shoots, and boiled leather equipment for nutrition. When food ran out, they scavenged abandoned American ration tins. A few even risked capture just to get a single can of meat. Letters recovered after the war revealed the despair. One Japanese officer wrote to his family, "We cannot find rice. We eat roots and leaves. Many have died. I do not know if I will see home again. His handwriting fades halfway through the page. He likely died before finishing. Meanwhile, U.S. logistics officers kept improving. They rotated cooks to avoid burnout, sanitized equipment daily, and enforced temperature checks for every meal. Even in combat zones, water for cooking was filtered and chlorinated. Food poisoning, a common killer in past wars, became almost non-existent. To the Japanese, this level of discipline in something as ordinary as food was unthinkable. To the Americans, it was standard procedure. It symbolized the new kind of warfare, one that valued data, planning, and maintenance as much as bravery. When American officers reviewed the campaign, they realized something powerful. The battle for Leyte had proven that feeding an army was as vital as arming it. The Quartermaster Corps earned new respect. Generals began calling them the Silent Front. By the time U.S. forces moved on to Luzon in January 1945, their kitchens rolled out again, clean, fueled, and ready. They didn't pause to celebrate victory. They just packed, cleaned, and served the next meal. And that quiet consistency was the secret. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was what made victory sustainable. Even Japanese war historians later acknowledged it. In post-war studies, they wrote, "The enemy's strength lay not only in weapons, but in organization. Their soldiers ate well because their nation prepared well. That preparation fed not just bodies, but belief. The belief that no matter where they fought, order would follow them." When the smoke cleared over Leyte, the battlefield looked like a graveyard of two philosophies. On one side, scattered rice bowls and rusted pots. On the other, neatly stacked mess tins, wiped clean and ready for inspection. That contrast said more than any propaganda poster could. U.S. logistics officers began collecting data to refine the system even further. They calculated that an American soldier consumed nearly 4 pounds of food a day. That meant one infantry division of 15,000 men required 60 tons of rations daily. Yet through storms, mud, and enemy fire, that demand was met. Not occasionally, every single day. Those numbers stunned post-war analysts. Japan, by comparison, could deliver less than 1/3 that amount to its frontline troops. Most of their supply ships were sunk before reaching port. The empire that once prided itself on precision had been undone by it. Its logistical system was designed for short, decisive wars. The United States had built one for endurance. Captured Japanese diaries told a consistent story. Soldiers described stealing food from civilians, hunting dogs, even boiling tree bark. Some begged their superiors for permission to surrender. Others simply disappeared into the jungle. Hunger dissolved the code of honor that their officers preached. Meanwhile, American troops ate 3 hot meals a day when conditions allowed. Their rations included canned meat, vegetables, powdered eggs, coffee, and even fruit. Field kitchens operated with clockwork timing. When shells fell nearby, cooks ducked, waited, and kept serving. The meal always continued. That routine created a rhythm of stability inside the chaos of war. Commanders understood its psychological effect. General Eichelberger, who led 8th Army operations, later said, "If a man knows he will eat, he fights with confidence. If he doubts it, he fights with fear." His reports urged every field commander to prioritize food distribution even before ammunition. After the war, Japanese officers studied captured American manuals. They couldn't believe the level of detail. Charts covered portion sizes, fuel efficiency, cooking times, sanitation, and waste control. Every soldier, no matter how far from base, had been part of a precise logistical loop. Nothing was left to chance. For the Americans, food became proof of superiority, not moral, but industrial. It showed that a democracy could organize itself into a machine of unimaginable scale. Every biscuit baked in Kansas or concealed in Chicago traveled through oceans, jungles, and storms to reach a man crouched in a foxhole. That was power, not abstract, but measurable. For the Japanese, it became a lesson carved in loss. Their soldiers fought bravely, but bravery could not replace calories. Their generals learned that supply was strategy. One wrote in 1946, "We were defeated by material, but more by method." As U.S. forces moved north toward Luzon, field kitchens followed. Soldiers joked that the smell of coffee always arrived before the artillery. That smell became a symbol of security, a reminder that order followed wherever the Americans went. By the time the Philippines campaign ended, the U.S. Army had delivered over 200 million individual rations. Each meal represented coordination among dock workers, engineers, quartermasters, and cooks. It was war fought through spreadsheets and stoves. When peace came, many Japanese officers visited American camps as observers. They saw soldiers washing mess tins in neat rows, cleaning burners, logging temperatures. It was humbling. One observer admitted, "Your war looked like a factory that moved." That statement became a quiet acknowledgement of what had really won the Pacific War. Not just bombs or battleships, but process. As survivors on both sides returned home, stories of the American field kitchen spread through memoirs and documentaries. It became a symbol of what modern warfare had become: organized, methodical, industrial. And for those who had faced it, it was unforgettable, because when everything else collapsed, discipline, morale, even humanity, the U.S. field kitchen stayed standing. And its fires, steady and clean, burned long after the guns went silent. The story of the U.S. field kitchen in World War II is not about food. It's about control. It showed that the nation capable of feeding millions across oceans had mastered more than war. It had mastered order. For Japan, war was a test of spirit. For America, it was a test of systems. One trusted sacrifice, the other trusted structure. On Leyte, those two beliefs met, and only one survived. The Japanese soldiers who watched American kitchens work under shell fire weren't just seeing efficiency. They were seeing a kind of civilization they didn't understand. One where, even in chaos, discipline extended to the smallest flame. That order was what separated survival from collapse. Every can opened, every stove cleaned, every pot scrubbed was a message. We are still here. We still function. Modern historians now call logistics the invisible front. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't look heroic. But it wins wars quietly, meal by meal. In the jungles of Leyte, the Americans proved that. Their kitchens weren't glamorous. They were muddy, hot, and loud. But they represented the future. A form of warfare where organization replaced courage as the foundation of strength. For the Japanese, the lesson came too late. For the world, it became clear. The power to sustain is the power to endure. And when the rain fell over the Philippines that winter, the fires of the American field kitchens still burned, clean, steady, unstoppable.